Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's live stream and episode. The title is When a Moment of Silence Held Infinite Truths. There's a chance I might rename it A Moment of Silence Holds Infinite Truths, something like that. I'm still trying to think which one I like more, but the idea is that a moment of silence is a very unique state of being where there is a greater self-awareness to how noise and movement are making your world seem alive for you. So you see, it seems like there's a blend of a pattern recognition kind of system and a certain body and world. And then there is a certain relationship being generated over what the world means and what it has always meant. Silence is very profound. There are many mystics that speak about it. For example, Maulana Rumi says, silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation. This guy was a man who was alive 900 years ago. He was a mystic. And a mystic is a being who is wondering about their relationship with the unknown, as if realizing that from the beginning of their birth, they have been put into a certain program of identification. They have been identifying with not only how they have communicated with the world, but how the world comes across to the individual. So a moment of silence is very fascinating because it is a sort of observance of who is observing and what is happening. So for me, I was like, okay, when I was younger, I was fascinated with both technology, but also fascinated with a sort of spiritual mysticism. And I was introduced to the concept of Sufi dervishes at a young age. You know, I remember seeing when I was living in Iran at the time, you know, I think I was 7 or something. I remember seeing whirling dervishes and whatnot. And so that was very fascinating for me because anytime you see a human being do a sort of ceremonial behavior that's out of the common ceremony, someone can say getting coffee in the morning is like that person's ceremony. You know, it's in some sense a ritual. You know, so whenever in this life I saw some sort of display of non-programmed behavior, and when I say programmed, that means as if the person thinks they're a thought. You know, whenever I saw any being go into a certain state where it was as if they were seeing something more out of life, you know, it's like you can see it in a person's eyes how far they see based on how their attention is being handled and conducted. So in yogic practice or any sort of mystical practice, the person would go towards a sort of self-imposed silence and stillness, but it was only being done, the meditation was only being done for a greater depth to be perceived in the object of meditation, you know? So something very interesting, not a lot of meditation teachers say it, but you don't need to meditate on stuff. You don't need to meditate on anything aside from yourself. You got to study yourself by realizing your mind is how things are happening. And so what I was getting to with the whole idea of technology and a sort of spirituality being in the mix, it's that we are in a world where free will likes to express itself as an engineer, but consciousness is more like an audience member just being quiet as much as it is needed. So what I mean by that is we are any moment where there is a sort of silence and stillness, thoughts dissipate. Think of it this way, that anytime someone goes to sleep, that moment where their thoughts are like slowly kind of fading, and then suddenly the person falls asleep, you know? Meditation is like those thoughts fading, but they don't fade to the point of sleep because there is an intention within the being that wants to see more in the world that they're seeing. So there's different approaches you can take, and there's only certain limited approaches given to us. Either we conceptualize and speak about and talk about truth, or we go do truth and try that practice and try that practice until we realize that truth is a metaphor for the unknown. Because if we are... And so I found my new vision and a sort of seeing where I would close my eyes, just sit still, be silent, have no thought of meditation, have no thought of I'm doing anything unique or I'm trying to like become one with God or devotion and all this stuff, you know? It's just you realizing that existence never needed a story, but we are all seeking the truth in stories. And so your mind will rest. It will rest in a way where it will realize your whole life you have had an obsession, a hidden obsession. You have had an obsession of constantly seeing the next self. And what I mean by that is that we think about ourselves in our life, and you could go on living 80 to 100 years where the most important thing to you is yourself. And you know, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying after billions of years, after a long time, even though for the mind time is subjective, but I'm telling you, after a long time, matter decided to stand in a new way. Evolution occurred. This creature spoke, and in doing so ignited worlds behind its eyes. These worlds developed memory. They developed imagination. It's as if that your mind is a sort of antenna also, you know, of some sort, where you're receiving and expressing, and at the same time, you realize that life is a story of preference. And this is huge because it means there is an underlying emptiness to the unknown. That means there could be a truth that is so overwhelming for our species that we might never believe it. So we are left in the domain of psychology to rationalize clarity. And unfortunately, the past cannot answer for the future because it will never see it. I have this very phenomenal theory. And I consider it phenomenal because of its uniqueness, of its novelty. And I feel I might be the first person on this planet bringing it up in this way, saying it in this way. But I believe our matter is going from the past to the future. But the mind, the consciousness, or the soul, if you want to get poetic about it, is journeying from the future to the present. So it's as if this is a very complex idea, but what it means is that that underlying conscience, intuition, logos is a journey from the outcome to now. That means in your mind, you're already living in a mansion, but physically, you know, you're just sitting on a bench. So what I'm telling you, it's as if like, it's very fascinating that we have limited not only imagination, but rationality to a certain interpretation of how time functions. You know, what if time was clay in the hands of the timeless, you know? So a moment of silence is in some sense revelation. You know, there's a very nice quote by a man named Guy Finley. He says, "There is nothing as certain as silence, stillness, and solitude to introduce you to the secrets of yourself." Sri Ramana Maharshi tells us that silence is conversation. Rumi, the mystic poet I brought up earlier, he says, listen to silence. It has so much to say. And I want to share another quote where it seems that it's from Dr. Alexander Dumas. It says, in stillness, in silence, in now, I am. The spiritual search takes you towards a pure, attributeless experience of intelligence. And the outer work, or let us say the external quest, takes you towards infinite nothingness. It takes you to an inconceivable infinity. So if we want to evolve to the peak of physical evolution, that's what we find. And if we want to reverse engineer a certain know-how of our true nature and true self, again, that goes towards an attributeless domain. So we are oscillating between infinity and nothing, and we're calling ourselves people. You know, some aliens might, you know, I just got a funny image in my head. Imagine some extraterrestrials, you know, playfully seeing, let's say, I don't know, let's say some enlightened extraterrestrials are like kind of looking beyond our skies at our species. And they'll be like, look at these guys, you know, they're so childish, you know, they're ants thinking they have the truth to the whole solar system. And so this is why humility and an appreciation of the present moment is divine. A moment of silence holds infinite truths. When self-observance leads towards the self-dissolution of a subjective identity, you look at this life breathing a fresh air, but you're breathing it as a new soul, as a new moment, unburdened, untouched by any sort of present objectivity and past subjectivity or future assumption. You have become the presence of all worlds in one moment. That is the power of the moment. You know? It's like, imagine like this. Imagine like there's somebody, like let's say there's a billionaire walking in the room, okay? Let's say it's like this stage, the billionaire walks on stage and there's this guy there just chilling, very quiet. And the billionaire suddenly points at that guy and he's like, you know what? I'm having a good day. You seem relaxed. I'm going to give you $1 billion. You know, $1 billion's too much. Let's say the billionaire says, I'm going to give you $1 million. You know, $20 million, something like this. It's like something shocking. And the whole audience looks at that guy and the billionaire says, do you want it or not? You know? And the whole audience goes, you know, like, oh my God, man, say yes. Are you crazy? Say yes, you know? And let us say that guy is just silently there, you know? Many people will say it's one of those obvious things where the guy should be like, yes, in an instant, you know? It's like he doesn't see the opportunity in front of him if he says no. So in a very playful manner, truth is like that too. There is an offer being given by the universe. The universe is giving you that, you know, a couple $1 million check, but it's giving it to you as a certain creature in a certain time. Like that's the equivalency to the $1 million check, you know? That the truth you seek has been within you all along. Language plays many games, and that is why there's a long excuse my language, but a long-ass reincarnation cycle. Like you know, reincarnation was one of those things. I'm like, okay, I can imagine. Crossfire of the past. Because to be honest, every day we're alive, it's a new civilization, but seldom do we realize the ability to change because fear is our master. That's the problem. Fear should be the servant. As the servant that realizes there is nothing to fear because it is one moment. Life is a moment. Life is a moment that is in some sense being segmented into an infinity. We can infinitely break something apart and call those each pieces names and create philosophies about it and break those pieces. And we are playing with infinity and we think our knowledge is certain. So this is the profound thing. What is the point of any branch of knowledge? It is for this tree to give fruit. And what is the fruit of knowledge? It is self-awareness to the individual society member that realizes it has an opportunity to contribute to the vision of its civilization before it closes its eyes, before the final curtain of time and space are pulled and the opportunity for our greatest performance has passed. We must realize this. I want to share some quotes by a man named Papaji. And this man was, if anybody in the, you know, who watches like videos like this, like if you know who Muji is, this is the guru of Muji. And Shira Manamar, was the guru of Papaji. Papaji, so this man's passed away now, but his words were remarkable, and I want to share some of it, some of the ways his mind generated ideology. Generated ideology in a very clear way, as if it was not his mind speaking, it was something more. So he says, look within. There is no difference between yourself, self, and guru. So yourself, the concept of the self, and the guru. He says you are always free. There is no teacher, there's no student, there's no teaching. These three are like, I think any student still in high school will agree. But this is, of course, being said in an abstract way, as if truth cannot be learned, it can only be realized. So anyways, he says, I'm just going to read his quotes one by one, you know, because some of them are very profound. He says, let your will burn in this fire so that it takes you nowhere else. Let yourself be burned in this fire of eternity, love, and peace. Don't be afraid of this fire. It is love itself. The desire for freedom is the fire of love. And I guess by fire here, Papaji is referring to transformation, to being open to change rather than trying to resist it. You know, it's as if that guy who, when karma came to his door, he opened the door and he's like, okay, man, you know, welcome. We have a new guest. We have this karmic moment to handle, you know. So a moment of silence that holds infinite truths. Guys, it is a moment where fullness and nothingness have just sat beside you in silent meditation. Where chaos and order have sat beside you in silent meditation. When the whole world is appreciating the silence where all meaning comes from. I'm going to continue with these Papaji quotes, but I think you will realize it, that your silence holds your wisdom, because in your silence there is an eternal witness. This eternal witness stands beyond conceptualization, it stands beyond duality, so the spiritual community believes in the non-dual. Papaji says, surrounded by nothingness, you have to do nothing. You have to do nothing to be who you are, nothing at all. And he's simply saying this because you are. Do you see the most fascinating thing? That the moment you make noise and physically move, you are associating with a dynamic story of the world. But when you sit still and silent throughout the day, don't even call it meditation, call it self-realization. You're just in that moment, just being still and silent in the havoc of this chaotically changing world, and realizing when you're still and silent, you become aware of how you're being. When you move and make noise, you become aware of what you're doing. So then there will require doership, and an ego cannot exist without something moving. That's the secret. Papaji's quotes, transcend the barriers of the sky towards a deeper depth. His quotes are very profound. I want to keep reading them. He says, one is always free and one is always alone. The mind is only dreaming. Which I believe it's kind of suggesting how if your ego or your I thought was a lens, your awareness, your attention, your consciousness is projecting a world, through this lens. He says, Papaji, if there is peace in your mind, you will find peace with everybody. If your mind is agitated, you will find agitation everywhere. So first find peace within, and you will see this inner peace reflected everywhere else. Where else will you find peace if not within you? I gotta give a, hypothetical high five to this man, it's spot on. Oh wow, this one's big. This is the last thing I'm going to read. I guess there's going to be two. So Papaji says, the whole world is your own self. So who is good and who is bad? Question mark. And finally, let us go to a poem of his. As the lotus does not touch the water, so do not let the world enter your heart. Being busy in the world is no trouble, unless you are troubled being busy. Then the only trouble is the trouble. Ocean does not complain about the dance of 10 million waves, so don't be concerned with the rise and fall of thoughts. Keep an old troublesome habit is like keeping poisonous snakes in your arms. Now is the time to hold the snake and throw it out. Bad moods are either past or imaginary future. In the present, there are no moods at all. Moods belong to the circumstance, to the past. Face the sun, and there will be no shadow of the moods. The world is like a tail of a dog. Its nature is to curl. The best you can do is stay quiet and not let anything bother you. Visitors will come and go. Don't interfere with these waves. Just be silent. The reason I share this, dear listeners, is because silence is very important. That it's how I bring the concept of an advanced communicator sometimes in these thoughts. The concept of an advanced communicator is simply an idea that once you reach the peak experience of your silence and stillness, you will attain a state of, let us say, mental freedom and clarity of mind, where you're functioning as just a natural, intelligent presence rather than an unnaturally desiring kind of personality. You will realize that there's no rush. So you relax and you fall into place, but you fall into a place called your true nature. It is a state of just you being aware you're being. And that's it. And from this attributeless state, you kind of, it's as if like you're going from one infinite world to a sort of death of that infinite world into a sort of like, let's say, being reborn. So it's as if you're going from you're jumping from infinity to infinity. And while you jump, you're in just empty space in some sense. I feel like sharing, like I got a thought right now to share a bit more about my personal experience of silence and stillness and kind of what arose in my cellular planes of imagination from that. And what I mean by that is that not all miracles are visible. And a sort of realization is like a non-physical occurrence that is changing the structuring of meaning and physicality. So I remember in 2000, well, here, let me begin with the first one. I remember I had a very profound moment where this is before like the depth I am at now. It was at a point where I felt like I had a certain ego. There was a certain personality I kind of wanted to be, you know. And in that egotism, even though being successful in attaining that personality, it's as if my ego was at first given permission to exist. And then suddenly I began feeling a sort of rejection. I began feeling a sort of force field that was pushing me away from having my thoughts on reality being 100% accurate. So I was rejected by life in some sense, I felt, because I was being too egotistical. So I remember going into this very nice park in Toronto, Canada. It's called Edwards Gardens. And I remember going there and I was alone, and I go and sit on a rock, and I face in a direction where I'm look the stream, like there's like it's a rock in the middle of a stream, and the water is moving from behind me. It's moving from behind me going forward, but I'm so it's my back's toward like where the water's coming from. So in front of me, I just see the water go forward. And so as I'm just there, I'm just contemplating. It's a sunny day. There's sunlight hitting me, and it's as if I'm in this sort of warm, kind of sitting on a rock, that the rock was also warm, and looking at this stream, looking at movement. So I felt I was the stillness and the movement of the stream. Like I felt like, if the stream or the rocks were kind of like homies, I would be vibing with like, the rocks. So what I mean by that is that I became I was very still. I just sat there still and silent. And I remember it was very unique because that was the first time in my life where I was just trying to do something right in life. But then I asked this question for myself: who's looking out through my eyes? Like it stunned me that I had lived that long in reality, and I had no idea what's looking through my eyes. It's as if I had theories, okay, so it's brain neurology, but I'm like, where is the meaning of all this being generated? And it seems to be more mysterious than science has answers for. So I was there, and for the first time, I began to develop a relationship where I realized there is something within me that the outside can't explain. And so I began to go towards silence and stillness, in a sense, embracing it, embracing silence, stillness, and solitude, because I felt like I had gotten a clue. I was given a clue by the universe, as if that was like a moment of self-reflection. And that moment of self-reflection, and by the way, at that moment, I had a lot of like, not too much, like spiritual ideas I had heard in my youth, but I was like really egotistical. I had a sales job. Like I felt like one of those guys in the boiler room trying to create that kind of future for myself. And honestly, on that rock, I realized something very profound, that there is the unknown. You get depressed when you think you know it all. When you realize you don't know it all, you kind of laugh and become patient, because you realize some things aren't revealed instantly. Life is a revelation that takes your whole lifetime. So, it's like, watch carefully how the world turns in your eyes, because at times it is your eyes that are turning the world into its next chapter of meaning, into its next contemplative rotation of social identity. We are at a point where it's phenomenal. Thought, our relationship to how we see ourselves is changing, and in doing so is creating numerous, in some sense infinite, new viewpoints to gaze at ancient knowledge. I remember when I was young, I heard the concept of old soul. Somebody said like, yo, this guy, he went up to someone else and said to that guy, yo, man, you're an old soul. And I was like, okay, I didn't know the soul had, was wearing a watch. Because for me, intelligence can be attributeless. And some people will be like, how can you call it intelligence then? I tell them it's because it is it is animate, but because it's what's animating, it's not the animator. So what I mean is, imagine an artist drawing a picture, and we can't suddenly say the artwork is the artist. Do you see? So we just see the artwork and we realize as it is happening, it seems like there's something drawing it, you know? So we look at the intelligence of this cosmos, and it's very simple. Like I can totally see how religions developed, because they were like, okay, what's moving all of this? And so because the person had an individual relationship with the world, so it became an individual God. It became a more powerful self moving all selves kind of thing, because that is in some sense the implication of God. It is a sort of universal. It's as if, like, I'll give you an example. For example, being in an Islamic environment, I was like, okay, so what does this mean? So they told me that God is within all, but God has no partner in the world. That means nothing can be God. You can't take like a rock and be like, yo, this is God, and people did back in the day, and it caused fury and rage and I guess some sort of enlightenment. But I'm telling you this, that in that moment of silence where I wondered what is looking out from my eyes, I realized because it is so instantaneous, I cannot define it. And by what I mean by instantaneous is as if like I was tapping into the present moment in a way where I noticed time and space are being stretched by my hands into manifestation. And when I say time and space is already there, so you don't worry about it. Time is a story, and the moment you don't identify as a character in a story, your eyes are open to worlds beyond the world. So for me, it's a very difficult situation, because when one talks about the unconscious, the unknown, the supernatural, it's not like how can I tell you? Scientists should very scientifically try to study how ideology has meaning. And you see, you cannot, because we are creatures symbolically simulating reality into further explanation. So what that means is whatever answer we find to truth, it's a mask held by our own hands, So I hope this talk was helpful. To be honest, when I started, I had just 2 points I really wanted to communicate. Oh my God, I have to share this quote. I just remembered. I don't know it verbatim, but I think it's so relevant. It's like once in a lifetime in this talk. So here, it's by William Blake, and you probably know it, but I'm going to read it. Okay, there we go. William Blake, there's these lines that he says, let's see, what is the line? To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. See the macrocosm in the microcosm. See the microcosm in the macrocosm. Allow to be present beyond time. Dear listener, you're the only mystic of your mind. You have to be honest. You have to be honest to access your true nature, you got to be true. And being true means that at some point you just look at this world and realize from the beginning you've had an ability to have a new view. So what does that say about our beliefs when any moment there could be a new exploration, a new discovery? What does that say about the violence, cruelty, anger, harshness, and aggression of our species? It says that either we must let go of the past or we must let go of the future. If we are caught in the past, we will carry on mistakes. We will continue mistakes rather than in an instant. The new generations just change their minds and they will change the world. But many of them don't look at their mind. Many of them don't even consider how they are a unique position of attention present in this lifetime once, and shyness is a curse. Shyness is a blindness, but from that blindness also comes great clarity. Because the biggest regret is that the concept of regret entered my mind. Do you see? The past can try to hold back the future and may think it will succeed, but if a pattern must present itself in nature, the nature of the world will rebel towards it, will walk with it. So anyways, this is we can get to the Q&A part if there's any questions as soon as I maneuver the tabs and find where is it? Okay, there we go. So if anyone asks questions, there's seems like one person. I'm going to end off with this quote that I feel my mind should produce in this moment. Silence is the language of the gods. Words are the world of man. I hope this talk has served you. For when a moment of silence held infinite truths, the past and the future melted in the smile of a present truth. Much blessings and namaste.